From teacher to professional fighter and amateur survivalist, you are now on a mission to inspire men to be more.
Teaching guys about survival, learning to be self-reliant, building that confidence in themselves, it lit something inside of them. When you endow somebody with the ability to do something they didn't know they could do, it gives them confidence to move into the world. Man, it's really powerful. How do I deliver that? Because the world needs more of it. When we're little boys, you're running around, you're playing in the dirt, you're falling down and scraping your knees, you're climbing trees, you're breaking shit, you're doing all these things, you're exploring the world in a very pure, primitive way. And then at some point, we steer our kids away from that and we never go back. There is an instinctive component that our modern world has pulled us away from, or at least distracted us from. Most guys are too gentlemen, need a little bit more savage. The hard part, I think, for most people is breaking them free from what they're comfortable with. We have to delve into that savage every once in a while to know that it's still there, to know what it feels like. And until we do that, how can we expect to actually grow in any meaningful way?
This is Sparta!
Welcome back to another episode of Spartan Leadership. I'm your host, Josh Kosnick. And count your blessings because today you get Josh squared, or Josh two times. When we were bringing nothing but heat. Co-founder of Savage Gentleman, philosopher, professional fighter, survivalist, and devoted husband and father, Josh Tyler. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, man. I don't know if that's necessarily a blessing. I suppose that remains to be seen.
Yeah, they'll find out. So man. Good. Well, happy to have you. And for those that aren't watching on video, Josh Tyler has an epic beard going. So my wife ixnayed me growing out a beard a few years back, so I get to keep it tight, but that's that's about it. I love the beard. Thanks, man.
It's a little overdue for a trim. I'm kind of in this weird phase though, because now I've let my hair grow out. So backstory: my wife, we got on this Vikings kick. Watching all the stuff that came out, the Vikings, and then the Last Kingdom, and so it's like, you're pretty Viking-ish. And I had a beard at the time. She's like, you should just let your hair grow out. I was sure, whatever. So now I've got like this long hair deal going on, and I'm in this weird spot where I can't go to a regular barber because they don't really deal with like long hair. And then if I go to like a salon, they're not going to know what to do with the beard. And now I got to go to two separate places, and I just don't have that kind of time in my life. So now I just look like this like very well-fed homeless guy.
Or a lumberjack, either way.
I mean, I've spent a lot of time in the outdoors. From my appearance, I think they're like, yeah, that guy just lives outside, and I do get out as much as I can, but it looks a lot more rugged than these nice four walls that I'm surrounded by probably lets on.
No, it's all right. And for those that don't know, for the ladies out there or men that can't grow a beard, in the cold, beards really cut that cold wind. So understand why Vikings and men of the past really grew their facial hair out, especially if they lived in cold climates, because it cuts that wind and cuts the cold off your face quite a bit.
Well, for anyone who, a lot of guys like to wear scarves and that sort of thing. And the beard is basically built in. Like I don't need the scarf at that point. I don't need the neck, the shemagh or whatever. I'm like, I'm good to go, man. Bring it on.
Just step outside.
That's right.
All good. All right, let's get into it. So from teacher to professional fighter and amateur survivalist, you are now on a mission to inspire men to be more. So take us through your journey. Help our listeners understand your why behind that.
I found out later on, I don't think I knew it growing up, that I had this kind of very much teacher built-in kind of mindset or teacher's heart. Right, where I really do genuinely enjoy teaching. And so when I went to school, it was really just a means for me to continue wrestling. I wrestled in high school, had some success with that, wanted to continue. And so college was just the next progression of that. So I literally only went so that I could continue wrestling. So I went to Old Dominion, wrestled D1 there for 4 years. And they have this thing where they kind of want you to walk away with a degree. And there's this whole academic side that I guess is kind of important. And so I went through the motions on that and didn't know what I wanted to do. And one of my buddies, who was a mentor of mine, my teammate, he was an upperclassman, he was getting his degree in health and physical education. And I thought back, I'm like, I had a pretty badass wrestling coach who was also a gym teacher. I could see going that route. So, okay, boom, I'll get my degree in health and phys ed, finish wrestling college. Didn't get all that I wanted to get out of that experience in terms of achieving the goals that I wanted to or thought that I could. So I still had that competitive drive. And that's where I fell into mixed martial arts. And that was just something because it was fun, right? I didn't have any huge aspirations other than, okay, this fills that void that, now that I could no longer wrestle, had left behind. Started teaching, was a substitute teacher, and through, several months of training, someone planted the bug of, hey, you should take a fight. Like you don't suck at this thing. And of course, when you're a Division I wrestler, you kind of have a leg up against, a lot of other people in that realm. And so, okay, that would be cool. Take my first amateur fight, goes amazing. Okay, when's the next one? And so, that really put me in a position where I kind of had to decide. I had to shit or get off the pot after an undefeated amateur stint of like 10-0. It was like, all right, if I'm gonna continue this, I need to turn pro. And if I'm gonna turn pro and really pursue this, then I need to kind of step away from the teaching and the coaching, which was really hard at the time. So I did that, pursued fighting for about 10 years. And along the way, got some opportunities to work with some guys teaching different things. I mean, I was coaching my teammates, got to travel all around the world while I was competing as well. And what I saw with that, and this is where some of the survival stuff came online, teaching guys about survival and really learning to be self-reliant, building that confidence in themselves, it lit something inside of them. And I recognize it. That's the thing. There it is. When you endow somebody with the ability to do something they didn't know they could do, and it's something that they know, hey, it gives them confidence to move into the world. Man, it's really powerful. And so that kind of became, okay, that I need to find that because how do I deliver that? Because the world needs more of it. And so that kind of led into the evolution of Savage Gentleman, all these things kind of culminating together, this idea of being both a savage and a gentleman. And I realized for myself that I had a side of me that was completely lacking. In my fighting career, I pursued just total destruction, right? The savagery,
right.
Pretty much to the exclusion of everything else. And when I started working with this other company, I was doing a lot of video editing and writing and more creative stuff. And I realized, oh shit, I've been missing this, that gentleman side, that creative side, had neglected it. And so I felt, far more complete. I'm like, I bet there's a lot of other guys that are running into similar things. And so that's what I found over time. And so that became the impetus for starting Savage Gentleman. And it just kind of took off and grew from there.
Well, I think it's got to be the opposite for most men because, so I boxed for a couple of years. So I have a similar story to you. And I went to college to continue playing my football career, not to go to college.
Right.
I didn't end up finishing. I dropped out and pursued a couple other things. And I actually I did boxing for a couple of years. But you realize real quick, especially if you're not that good, that that's a really hard road and hard life to live. And so that was the end of my quote unquote savagery. So I think for most people, as you were saying that, I'm like, most of us get the gentleman status, especially the career I chose, which was in financial advisory, financial planning. I'm in a suit every day, so I look like a gentleman. Now, trust me, there's plenty of people out there dressed in a suit that look like a gentleman that are not. However, that's some of the lifestyle we're leading, and then we don't get that opportunity to be a savage like you were. So I feel like it's the opposite for most of us than the tack that you came into it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the circles that I was traveling in, were a lot of other professional fighters, a lot of, tier 1 military guys, so these guys tended to lean more on the savage, right? But like you said, but that's a small selection, right? In the scope of the world, you're going to get more guys in our society that lean further to the gentleman side and have neglected the savage, right? And you think about, when we're little boys, hopefully, you're running around, you're playing in the dirt, you're falling down and scraping your knees, you're climbing trees, you're breaking shit, you're setting things on fire, you're doing all these things, you're exploring the world in a very, I think pure, primitive way. And then at some point, we steer our kids away from that, and we never go back. And yeah, we need to grow up and we need to mature and we need to become responsible, certainly as men, but we also can't lose sight with some of these very, I hate to use the word primal, because it's kind of been sullied by some others out there that have probably used it a little too much, but but there is an instinctive component that our modern world has, I think, pulled us away from, or at least distracted us from. And so, yeah, I think most guys are too gentlemen, need a little bit more savage. And so, how do we find that? And the hard part, I think, for most people is breaking them free for what they're comfortable with. And this was the hard thing for me, making the decision to stop fighting, and make the transition out of that, was like, as hard as fighting is, and you're in the game, and as difficult it is to make your way through that. I mean, it's hard to make a living on that. You don't really do it for the money. Like, it's probably the dumbest way to earn a living you could imagine. Like, you could work at Starbucks and make more money, unless you're in that top, fraction of a percentage.
Right.
But, it was what I was comfortable with. It was, and it was what I was good at. And so when I was trying to decide, again, this shit or get off the pot moment of, okay, do I continue my fighting career, or do I pursue this savage gentleman business thing, which I have no clue. Even to this day, I still really don't know what the hell I'm doing. Like, I'm not a business guy by any stretch of the imagination. But that was the thing that made more sense, the security in it for my family, the longevity. It's like, you only have so many years. Your brain can only take so much damage before, it starts to fall apart. And, you have to be looking ahead of like, okay, what's the next evolution? What's the next step? Where am I going with this? And there's no job security in the fight game, unless you're smart enough, unless you're good enough to make, millions on the front end, and smart enough to invest and save and put that away. There's no retirement plan, right?
It's not even like the NFL where there actually is a retirement plan.
There's literally nothing. And so looking at that and seeing, how hard it is, the goal was like, oh man, I'll get super good, make a name for myself, and then I'll start my own gym. Well, man, the gym business is pretty brutal too. I've got like a, kind of a crash course in that, and seeing like, damn, I don't know if that's the route I want to go either. So the Savage Gentleman opportunity came along, and that, as hard as it was to step away from what I was comfortable with, even though it was physically harder, man, I knew that, okay, the real challenge was to go off into the unknown and do this thing that I was far less comfortable with. And so that kind of became the direction that I took, and that's what I've been pursuing. And I came to the realization too, this was the survival TV show that I was on. Really, it's amazing when you starve yourself for like 21 days and you freeze your ass off in the cold for that long.
Were you on Naked and Afraid?
No, it was made by the same production. It was on Discovery Channel. It was a different show. It's called Ultimate Ninja Challenge, which doesn't sound like a survival show, but actually was. Super like under the radar, didn't really, make a lot of waves, in the public eye. But for me, it was a huge, profound experience, because, and this is part of kind of my thesis of how we develop as men and as humans, is like, all right, we've got this body, and you've probably experienced it in training, right? Most of us have. You have this body, and as you're working out, there comes a certain point where your body's like, hey, fuck you, we're done. And then you get into the realm of the mind, where your mind's like, no, we can do this. We've got more, and we're going to keep going, right? And so you push on. And so the body is broken, and now you're relying on the mind to keep you going. And then if you carry that out further, if you've done any kind of endurance thing into the like 6 to 8 or 24-hour mode, your mind, that your mind eventually starts to give way, right? And now your mind is out of the equation. And now the only thing left is your spirit, right? And that's the only thing that's going to continue to push you on. And sometimes you have to remove that mind and that body to get to that spirit and do some really deep soul searching, and have some conversations that you wouldn't get otherwise. And so you can do it in a lot of ways. Being out in the cold in British Columbia and like I said, freezing and starving your ass off for 3 weeks is enough time to do that. And so I realized, okay, this is where I need to go. I need to let go of my old self, let go of what I've known. And I realized I can always dabble in it if I want to. If I get that itch that I need to get punched in the face, I can go into the gym and train, or I can do like I'm doing now. I've got a pro BJJ black belt competition coming up that I'm doing in 2 weeks from now. I don't know when this recording is going to come out, but it's like, you know what, man, I get a little antsy. I need to I need to dust off my dancing shoes a little bit here. And so I can
Step
do
back
that.
onto the mat and show that you still got it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, we have to like delve into that savage every once in a while to know that it's still there, to know what it feels like. And we should be curious of, okay, where do I stand? What do I have within me, and what can I do? What circumstances can I create to draw that out of me? And that's how we learn and understand ourselves. And until we do that, until we really know where we're at, how can we expect to actually grow in any meaningful way?
No, it's so good. So, getting back to the savage piece and kind of state of our nation, men in the past, right? So men in the past, if we go back 100, 200 plus years, were absolute savages, or at least capable of being savages. But certainly I think we could say that they're savages in comparison to what we are today. But they chose to be gentlemen. Like, how would you describe, knowing with that context, how would you describe the current state of men in our nation?
Man, I mean, it's just an inundation of comfort and convenience, right? That's the progression that we've gotten to. And so, yeah, we are incredibly soft as a society. And even, I would say even myself, for as like badass and manly as I am, you look at a dude 100 years ago and that guy knows shit that I can barely wrap my head around. I mean, I go out and, I'll chop wood for 3 or 4 hours, with a maul, and dude, I'm smoked and I'm in pretty good shape. And these guys were out there doing that 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, and so even by those standards, like, my ass is pretty soft. And by comparison to to the average guy that you see, you know what I mean? I'm fucking Superman. So you can see the degrees, right? Of separation, of how far we've come. And I'm not saying, I mean, it's great that we don't have to go and you have to plow and till your field by hand, you know what I mean, so that your family survives. That's awesome. I'm not saying we need to go back to that, but we have lost something in outsourcing every aspect of our life, where we no longer do anything physical. We're no longer remotely inconvenienced. We can't even be inconvenienced to get up off our ass and make food in the kitchen, let alone grow it in our yard or hunt it, in a field. We just push buttons on our phone and someone shows up and hands it to us already made. I mean, if you're sick and you're under the weather, sure, it's nice to get, a little nice bowl of soup show up at your house. But fuck, man, we're not doing ourselves any favors by continually doing less. Yeah. So that's where we have to be cognizant of, okay, this mechanism, this meat suit that I'm in, it needs a certain level of adversity. And if I don't give it that, it starts to fall apart, not only physically, but mentally. It starts to go off the rails. And I'm not saying, again, we roll back the clock and go back to the early 1900s, but we just need to know, hey, sometimes you got to get your hands dirty. Sometimes you got to do some hard shit. You got to get your heart rate up. You got to get punched in the face. You got to breathe hard and sweat a little bit. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems. And if you don't believe me, you can look at the rate of suicide in men today. You can look at basically any statistic you want to. Men are not doing well. And I don't know, I don't know shit about shit, to be honest with you. But my theory is it's because we are too comfortable, and we hate the thought of any kind of discomfort. So we've insulated ourselves too much, far too much.
Yeah. I agree on all of it. And you may not have like the education to say that you know this to be fact as far as like a formal education. But the fact of the matter is, if we look at any point in history, actually, I'll just ask this question. What percentage of men do you think could, if we lost all this comfort, let's say, I think one of the most realistic, let's say doomsday things that could happen would be an EMP.
Sure.
Let's say an EMP hits, all our electronics are down. Mm-hmm. All that comfort disappears. All of our cars, because they're all got computer chips in them, are worthless.
Yep.
We can't communicate. We can't order food. Like, what percentage of men do you think could actually make it in our country right now if that happened for, let's say even a week?
I mean, I think we've got enough adipose stores in most men. They could last a week on nothing if they didn't freeze to death. They're not going to starve to death in a week. They got plenty. You know what I mean? Like we're pretty healthy, and I say healthy in terms of excess society.
He's saying a bunch of you are fat. That's what he's saying.
I'm saying we could pay better attention to what we consume. How we move our bodies on a regular basis. But I maybe 10% of the guys I think could figure it out. I think you have about, I'd say there's probably like 1 to 5% that are already squared away, and if it went out tomorrow, they wouldn't miss a beat, right?
Yeah.
And then outside of that 5%, I think you've got another 5 to 10% of guys that know enough and are resilient enough and have challenged themselves in enough ways that they could work through. I mean, the human species is incredibly resourceful. The problem is, and we can take other experiences and reapply them. That's how we have, evolved to the state that we have. We didn't know all this stuff, but we used our intellect and our other experience to then problem solve into the new scenarios that have come up, right? The problem is, I don't think we have enough guys on a regular basis and girls facing real challenges. I mean, real challenges, not, okay, what color blue should I dye my hair, or, what bathroom do I think I should be using? I mean, real questions and real challenges of like, hey, if I get this wrong, I'm going to die, or something really, really painful or serious is going to happen. We don't have very many situations where we put ourselves into that and learn from, right? I think the toughest thing that most guys will ever do in their lifetime is probably play like Pop Warner football, or maybe they're on the high school team, and the hardest thing they have to go through is losing
an injury or something,
or losing the state championship or whatever. And to all you young guys who might be experiencing some of those things, it's tough. I've been there. It's the hardest thing you'll ever have to deal with when you're 16 years old, barring any catastrophe. But these are really, I mean, these are, that's small T trauma, right? Not big T, like, holy shit, man, we got lucky on that. You kind of have to, in some way, confront your own mortality to really learn these lessons and understand what it takes to survive something. And we're not really equipping guys with that in any meaningful way. We send them out, we go to school, then maybe you go to a higher education, and then you get a job and a career. And again, maybe you face the chopping block, right? There's some budget cuts, and you lose a job. But, that's a lot different than running up on a freaking saber-toothed cat, with nothing but a spear in your hand, like, way back when. I mean, perspective is a hell of a thing. Or freezing to death at night because you don't have the right tools or abilities to start a fire, and that's the only thing that's going to keep you alive. Like, it really puts stuff in perspective. And I'm not saying everyone has to just go out and live like a caveman, but I'm not saying to not do that either. It's not a bad experience to gain some perspective.
No, for sure on the perspective side, but also, like, there are, like you said, capital T trauma. There are things that will happen in your life, whether it's, you losing a job and, heat being cut off because you don't have the money to pay for it, stuff of this nature, like being able to change a tire on the side of a road. Like, we've lost so much, and people knowing how to do that because AAA is only a call away, or you call for help. Most men don't even know how to do that. And one thing I don't want to lose, because you have the shirt that you're wearing and the brand on the Savage Gentleman side, is we are 100% capable of being a gentleman and a savage at the same time. I'm not sure, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that if you were raised a gentleman and never taught any savage skills, that you could just turn on the savage.
I don't think so. No, I mean, I think it is well, the gentleman is learned, right? It's both. Right. We as men, we start off as boys, and boys really don't know anything other than just to be little boys, right? But to become a man, whether that's a savage man or a gentle man, or ideally a combination of both, we have to be taught those skills. We have to be shown. And sadly, there's a lot of guys that don't ever get that. They don't get those lessons. They're all out to fend for themselves. And so, it's easy to look and point fingers and identify all these guys that don't quite measure up, to whatever standard we want to set, right? Your standard, my standard, whoever's standard, whatever. We can easily see, there's a lot of guys below the bar, and, but we have to understand and have some level of compassion to say that, like, okay, that's a lot of it probably isn't their fault. Like, our society really does nothing to push guys in the right direction. And, if you didn't have a strong male father figure in your life, who the hell's going to teach you? What are you going to learn it from? Watching TV? So now you create this, pseudo Rambo Arnold Schwarzenegger, that's your understanding. That's the depth of your masculinity. Or you become this very incredibly feminized version of a guy because that's all you've ever known, and you haven't seen any real expression of masculinity in its purest, truest form. Of course you're going to not know how to do certain things. And, we can shit on these guys and say, oh, you poof, you can't change a tire, you hipster, you wannabe lumberjack looking douchebag. We can say all these things, but when's the last time one of us actually showed one of these guys what to do? How to run a chainsaw, how to change their oil, how to swing a hammer, literally anything. When's the last time, and I'm speaking not to you, but to a lot of our keyboard tough guys out there who, love to talk about the state of masculinity and how shitty all the men are today and how everyone's a pussy, except for them. They're the baddest dude on the planet, but everyone else, is just a complete worthless sack of shit, candy ass, limp-wristed, the list goes on. And it's like, oh, when's the last time you took, a moment to teach anybody anything? I mean, by all means, if you have all this wisdom and knowledge, man, share it, please. Like, I want to know, you know what I mean? Like, teach me if you're that much more badass than I am, and sadly, these guys are not, for whatever reason. I mean, it can't be that they actually don't have the knowledge and they're not that, and it's just their insecurity that causes them to say all these things. So it couldn't be that. It must be something else that's preoccupying their time.
Right. Couldn't be that.
Sharing their wisdom and knowledge and experience with the rest of us.
So you brought up the word masculinity a couple times there, and obviously this toxic masculinity buzzword has secured a seat right alongside seemingly gaslighting and narcissism. So that the buzzword or phrase toxic masculinity, it may be a new concept to some, but I feel like it's out there enough where everyone has heard that. Mm-hmm. Let's break that down. What is that? When you hear that, what do you think of? Like, I have some feelings every time I hear it, because it does feel like gaslighting, and it feels like it's demeaning masculinity as a whole. Yeah. Which masculinity in and of itself isn't a bad thing. It's needed. No, it's necessary.
It's a necessary thing. And it just is femininity. You know, they're not, and that's the thing too, where people tend to make this false assumption that they are opposing forces, that they're opposite. So the opposite of masculine is feminine, but I don't see them on they're actually like, they're linear. They're on the same line with each other. They're just different expressions of human energy, right? And women have a feminine side which expresses in one way, and men have a masculine side that expresses in the other way. But the opposite of masculine isn't inherently, you know what I mean? They're cohesive, right? They're part of the same part of the same whole.
Well, let's just put it on a line, right? Like just a straight line, femininity over here, masculinity over here, and you're somewhere on that line.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I look at it more from a circle where they kind of complete each other, and almost looking at it, not to get too mystic or woo-woo here, right? But if you look at like a yin yang symbol, right, where you've got the predominantly black side and the predominantly white side, but there is a component of each within the other, right? I kind of think of it that way, and if you notice, they fit perfectly together. You know, to have one without the other is a really weird shape and incomplete. So there's a compatibility where they intersect and come together. And there is, I think, and you know, and I think most of us know this to be true, you're never going to have anyone that is 100% masculine or 100% feminine, right? They're each, because otherwise you couldn't ever talk to the other, right? You would be speaking two different languages. So even, you know, and this is a different direction, and we can go there later. I want to answer your question.
But hold on. I really like your example there, though, because my definition to a yin yang is for every dominant strength, there's a corresponding weakness. And for every dominant weakness, there's a corresponding strength. Okay. That's how I've always envisioned the yin yang. So as you put those two sides together of masculinity and femininity in that yin yang form, like they do complete each other. I really like that.
And, you know, as far as toxic masculinity, I wish I had been thinking, because we have a t-shirt, we have a toxic masculinity t-shirt actually. Because I think the term is silly only in that it's just poor marketing. It's just the result of bad marketing, where whenever it was originally created, whenever the idea had surfaced, I think that there was actually good intentions behind it. I think someone was looking at the situation and they saw a lot of characteristics of men at the time, and we can look back in history and say, you know, yeah, maybe these guys were missing the mark a little bit in some ways. You know, we were talking about in the past how things were great and men were men and all these things. But, you know, if you think back to like our dads and granddads, it wasn't a lot of touchy-feely, you know, like, I don't know about you, but there, you know, there wasn't, I don't know that my grandfather ever told me that he loved me. You know what I mean? I know that he did. He never said it. I never got a hug from him. Right. It was a handshake. And so there was a period of time where men were emotionally closed off. Mm-hmm. And that, you know, separation, this, I think, taking, you know, stoicism and applying it incorrectly might be one way to look at it. Right. Where, you know, we talk about being stoic, but that's different than stoicism, right? The philosophical idea. Being stoic, in the conventional sense, just means like nothing phases you, just whatever happens, right. You just take it on the chin and you show no emotion. And that's not actually what they were talking about. It was again, another conversation to delve into that, but we had these very closed emotionally guys, and it wasn't great. And so I think someone said, hey, these guys that are not really being in touch and understanding these feelings, not being able to communicate and express that, it's causing some problems. And they're raising, there's a lot of anger that gets translated through that. When you have no emotion, the only emotion you have is anger, that's all that comes out. If every, to the hammer, every problem is a nail, right? And again, I'm speaking from experience, because until after I got married, I only had just like neutral and rage, and there was nothing in between. I wasn't sad, I wasn't disappointed, I was just like fucking destroy the world at the snap of a finger. Until it took a long time to realize, yeah, that's not healthy. That's not good. And so they bred this notion of like, hey, we need to help guys understand. They called it toxic masculinity for understandable reasons. And then slowly over time, the phrase got hijacked, and it's basically been now used to apply to anything that somebody doesn't like about what a man may or may not do, right? And so now it's a nonsensical term that is meaningless. And for us in our company, we make fun of it because it's pointless. Now, we do appreciate, like, hey, men need to take a look at themselves, and we need to do, we need to work on ourselves and improve in certain ways. But the implication of toxic masculinity, that there is any form of true masculinity that is toxic, the notion that, too much masculinity, that you cannot have too much masculinity. It is impossible. Whatever you're seeing that you think is too much of is not in fact masculinity. It's a false masculinity. It's a
false bravado. It's narcissism. It's something. Yeah.
It's not actually masculine. So the term, the actual, again, so it's a bad marketing. They came up with a poor phrase to describe what they were trying to do, and now it's been slapped and labeled on everything, and it's just not useful.
The phrase has been overused, overplayed, and I think you're right. There's many, many things that we acknowledge, especially I feel like us Gen Xers. Mm-hmm. We grew up with, like, we now have this acknowledgement that we grew up with parents and grandparents that were taught not to feel.
Yeah.
And therefore, we weren't affirmed. We weren't, hugged. We weren't told that emotions are okay. We were told the exact opposite. But we have an acknowledgement of this now. So I feel like our generation's the tipping point. Where it gets to be a little bit dicey is the generations below us, because now we're seeing some men that really don't know how to be men. They play into the emotions and victim too much,
right? And
don't want to work and don't want to do this and don't actually want to step up to the plate. And that also, if we want to throw the phrase back out, is toxic, right?
Every bit, yeah.
So, but anytime people talk about, this next generation coming up, blah, 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 I always am quickly to insert that, hey, it's not their fault, it's their parents' fault.
Absolutely. And the thing is it's a pendulum, and the pendulum swings, right? You go back to our parents and the parent generation before, and we swung way too far in the one direction of just, apathy and not, lack of affirmation. I mean, hell, during those times they were saying, that was the cry it out method of like, fuck that baby, leave his ass in the room, he'll figure it out.
Let him cry it out. That's right.
Let him cry it out. Fuck yeah, man. Just, he's just a newborn child. And now the studies are saying like, hey, maybe that wasn't so great. Literally no animal in the wild that we know of just leaves it intentionally leaves their crying baby unattended. It's bananas to even think that would be a strategy of like, yeah, that is what's best for the child, because, if you give them too much, you're going to spoil it. It's impossible. You cannot give an infant too much love. You cannot. It is like, and I will fight you if you think otherwise. And I'm not telling anybody how to parent. They can raise their kid however they want to, but I'm telling you my belief.
well, and studies have backed that up now
and
as well.
studies have backed that up, right? I mean, I'm not just pulling shit out of thin air. I mean, this is anecdotal experience, and it's backed by research. And again, you can kind of take a look at the product of that. What happens when you go through that route? And I'm not saying everyone who was raised in a cry it out is now super fucked up and, a nutcase, but I don't know that they're also the most actualized individuals. I don't know that they're the most self-affirming, like to use, the phrase you use. It would be interesting to see the correlation with that. But yeah, so now the pendulum is swinging way too far in the other direction. And now we're all in our feels about everything all the time. And the only thing that matters is my emotional state, which is completely dictated by everything outside of myself. I have no internal control of it. It is the world around me that affects me. And what can I do about it, man? I just have to go to my safe space and get away from all these bad, mean things that are doing stuff to me, and I can't, do anything about it, but try to just avoid it and go away and hide and, not look people in the eye and not have real conversations with people because it's uncomfortable and it's icky.
Yeah, and you combine that with parents that are snowplowing every problem out of their way. Yeah. They're not able to. So many people in our generation heard of the helicopter parent.
Yep.
Where they would swoop in, everything's okay, blah, blah, blah. But the snowplow parent's even worse.
Yeah.
The snowplow parent that's plowing every problem out of the way for their child is not equipping them for real life. Yep. But as you're talking there, I just had this experience this morning talking about what's in your control and what's not in your control. So thank God I get up every morning early enough to equip my mind for battle every day. I give myself about an hour and a half before the kids get up. I'm reading, meditating, praying, hydrating, doing all the things to get myself ready for battle. And this morning, my 5-year-old, we had Valentine's Day yesterday, and the kids had probably too much sugar and didn't get to bed on time and all that jazz. So I have 3 girls and a boy. The boy's 5 years old. He was a menace this morning, just screaming, did not want to go to school, claiming his tummy hurt, which we're like, probably does because he had too much candy, he had too much sugar. On the flip side, that's also his go-to excuse when he doesn't want to do something. Mm-hmm. So it's like the little boy that cries wolf. Yeah. Anyhow, we get to school. Long story short, my 7-year-old is very upset because she forgets her winter coat. And they have recess outside and whatnot. And she's blaming it because Cam was such a mess this morning that, and she was worried about being late for school. And I'm like, honey, you are in control of your emotions, and remembering your stuff. Yes, he was a mess. He was stressing all of us out, but you still got to maintain your stuff, stay in your stuff. So it was a good opportunity to express that to her. But yes, that is not how most parents are parenting nowadays in teaching people what's in control and what's out of their control.
We're just not teaching any personal responsibility, right? And again, it comes from, I think, it's tough because it comes from a good place. As a parent, you want nothing but the best for your kid. And this isn't to beat up on parents who are too involved, right? I mean, again, the pendulum swing the other direction. They're not involved at all. They're just completely disassociated. They don't give a shit, do what you want. I don't care. I'm totally uninvolved. That's not great either. So, kudos to you for caring. It's just that people don't realize that you are doing a disservice when you remove all obstacles, when you remove all adversity. Your kid never gets any opportunity to learn. And this idea of
you're handicapping them.
That you don't realize it, but you are. And we have to take, personal responsibility from things. And when you don't give opportunities for personal responsibility, how do you expect them to learn that? Do you just expect at 18, they wake up and they're like, yes, now I am responsible for my own actions and decisions and the consequences.
My birthday. I turned 18. I'm good to go.
And now I know exactly how to navigate these things. And when something comes along, I, can draw from, no experience whatsoever, because everything was always handled for me. And so this is the tricky part, and there isn't a rule book, and it's the same thing for ourselves. Our lives are so easy now. We actually have to create that adversity for ourselves, right? There's no need for me to be able to like run 5 miles if I really think about it. You know what I mean? Like, barring catastrophe, I got a car. Why? You know what I mean? Like the minimum amount of movement that I really need to be able to do to live my life, quote, to exist, excuse me, not live, to exist, right? As I need to be able to walk from my car into my house, and then I need to walk up 1 flight of stairs to get into the bed. And, I probably need to be strong enough to at least be able to carry a couple of bags of groceries. And aside from that, that's it. However, so for me to go out in the garage and like chuck a kettlebell around or whatever, it's stupid. What a waste of energy. You don't need that to survive, but you do, right? Because the organism, and we're an animal, like people want to say that we're different, but I mean, we're just a very sophisticated, self-aware animal, intelligent, with consciousness and, with a soul, which adds some things to it. But, eons of evolution has been ingrained into our DNA that in order to build the structure and for this machine to run efficiently, it has to have certain stimuli. And the only way that it will ever, stimuli and stressors, and the only way that it can grow and improve, because if it isn't improving, law of entropy, it's going the other direction. There is no stasis. Everyone thinks like, oh, I've arrived at this thing and now I can just sit here. You can't. That it's the second you stop, it starts going backwards. That's just again, I didn't write the laws, I didn't make the rules, but that's everything goes from a state of order to disorder, right? So shit falls apart if you don't maintain it. So if you're not giving it those stressors and you're just sitting comfortably by doing nothing, you don't use it, you lose it. It goes the other direction. And so I have to arbitrarily, because I can get on my phone and do 99% of everything I need to do with my business from this little device that I can hold in my hand. Yeah. I don't need to be strong. I don't need to be fast. I don't need any of that. But the meat suit that I'm wearing needs that. And if I don't acknowledge it, if I don't recognize that, and I don't give it the things that it needs, it's going to fall apart. And when that starts to fall apart, then my brain starts falling apart. And when that goes, now my soul starts to crumble. And now I'm just this shell, of a being that's just existing rather than living.
Then you're a skin and bone suit and not a meat suit.
Yeah, I'm a skin and or not a meat suit. I'll use the word adipose suit.
But so I just want everyone to key in on that, because it is such an important point. You're either green or growing or ripe and rotting. There is no stasis, right? That little line there is like a lullaby to me that my dad always taught me, because he learned it from one of his mentors, and it's just been passed down. Green and growing or ripe and rotting. There is no stasis. Yeah. So to that point, you look at someone like Goggins and think he's crazy, or you think at Cam Hanes is crazy. Mm-hmm. They've figured out, no matter what they do, what crazy record they set, that they still have to grow.
Yeah. Yeah.
They figured it out.
And, I think Goggins is an interesting one, and I don't know the guy, and I'm not gonna mudsling him, but I would say, I don't know that Goggins is the route that I would put anybody on. Like, he's his own special fucking unicorn. Yeah. I mean, don't do what he does. You be inspired by him,
for your own being, not necessarily do exactly what he does. Yeah, but think about Jeff Bezos. Is like Jeff Bezos was a nerd.
Yeah.
And just, not any physical specimen whatsoever. And you look at a picture of him when he started, and then look at a picture of him now. He must have been eating
a lot of liver.
All primal, baby, all primal.
Just so primal, bro.
Oh, that guy's been making his apology tour.
Yeah, but it's an interesting it's an interesting phenomenon, but not unexpected. And this is what happens. This is what happens with pretty much everything, I think, is there's a point of critical mass, and especially when it comes to something like a business, which doesn't have a soul, right?
For everyone that doesn't know, we're talking about Liver King real quick.
Yeah. Sorry, we're being a little obtuse here. We're ambiguous, but yeah. And so what happens is when you create something that exists to only serve itself, right? Which is what a business is. Any kind of corporation, they can put whatever labels, they can create whatever motto they want to. That business only exists to serve itself and for no other reason, right? And every decision that is made for that business is solely for the purpose, not for the employees, not for the owners, but for the business. And I think we forget that sometimes. And as entrepreneurs, we can sometimes run into that with our own business, where this thing that we've created to be our freedom, right, is now enslaving us. And it doesn't give a shit. It doesn't care about your feelings, about your relationship. It doesn't care about any of that. Once it reaches a certain size, it becomes its own artificial intelligence, so to speak, since that's a hot button, and it exists to serve itself. And so when that happens and those decisions continue to come from that place, you get a liver king. You get someone who will compromise their integrity for the sake of the bottom line, and they lose themselves in this larger thing that they have now become enslaved to. And so, I can see, and I've seen it before, where people will create this persona of themselves that is larger than life. It's bigger than themselves, and it eats them. It becomes them, and they can no longer exist without being like whatever Brian. So whatever his name is, right? He was no longer that guy. He was Liver King, which means you have to be Liver King all the
24/7.
24/7. You could never not be that fictitious character. That's the problem, is it's not a real thing. A corporation, a business is not a real thing. It doesn't have a soul. And so you can't treat it like a living, breathing person, and so it's this, and anytime again something gets so big, it gets a critical mass and it cannot support itself and it implodes. And we're kind of seeing that, I think, a lot of what we're seeing with the state of the country right now is things have gotten too big and they're having problems. The government, is existing not for us, but for itself, right? It's lost that soul. It's lost its humanity. And we see people do that. People, when they exist only for themselves, they lose that humanity because they can't, there's no sacrifice, right? The business is not going to sacrifice, right? It's not going to give up anything for anyone else because that is counterintuitive to its survival. And so without that human element, which is love, by the way, it falls apart. And so that's kind of what we're seeing in a lot of these, Liver King being a micro example, big corporations of a much larger scale, and then, to some extent the US government. We're seeing that because there's no love present. And this is where I think the story of Jesus is like the most powerful thing, that we have, is because it is the ultimate sacrifice. To think that the creator of the universe decided, you know what, man, I'm going to throw on this me suit and I'm going to go down there and show these guys how it's done. And then I'm going to give up and forfeit my life for them to show, this is the thing, is to sacrifice, because love is sacrifice. And anything that doesn't have that in it is ultimately going to fail, whether it's you yourself and your endeavor, whether it's your business, whether it's something larger than that. If you're missing that element, it's not going to work. It's not sustainable. That's the problem. It's not sustainable.
That's so powerful. And the story of Jesus is the most powerful example. And that's all he preached was love. Mm-hmm. And to be a savage and to be a gentleman is love as well. So we talked about, you're kind of leading into this. So I want to ask a question going backwards and then a question going forwards as we kind of wrap up.
Sorry,
our time
I know that
here.
was a lot, but I was like, It just hit me and I had to run with it. So
Hey,
sorry.
no, it's on you today. It's what's on your heart. So, Josh, as we look back at the past 3 years of the pandemic, what took you by surprise the most?
The only thing that I found really surprising was the amount of people who were willing to get on board after they came out and said, listen, we relieve ourselves from any and all legal responsibility. We're going to give you the vaccination because, we're here to help. But if anything bad happens, that's not on us. So don't come crying if, it doesn't work or there's bad side effects or anything. We're pretty sure it's safe, but, just in case we have a carte blanche on this thing. Right. And people were like, yeah, okay. That for me, that was the biggest red flag in the whole thing. And then the fact that so many people allowed their fear to override their logic, to get on board with that. Because I get it. I remember in the beginning part, we didn't know anything about it. And I remember being like telling my kids, like, hey, don't touch anything. Like, because we didn't know, like, hey, does this thing just sit on a surface for indefinitely?
Well, they told us basically our packages we had to let sit outside for 2 weeks.
Yeah, like don't touch doorknobs, don't even look at anybody. And then we found out it's like, all right, well, unless someone comes up and directly spits in your mouth, you're probably going to be okay, But by that time, the damage had been done, and people had been so convinced that this boogeyman was going to get them in their own car by themselves, if they didn't have a mask on, that this thing was going to spontaneously just come through the vents. And
I live in Madison, Wisconsin. There's still people driving in their car alone with a mask on.
Here's the thing about the masks. Like, I actually don't hate the idea of people wearing a mask. If you're sick and you have to go about your day, yeah, man, put a mask on. Do us all a favor. I don't need you sneezing on me in the grocery line. If you can't keep your ass at home. That's one thing that's good too. It's also normalized people when they don't feel well. Like, it used to be, suck it up, you better be here at the office. Now it's like, oh, you got the sniffles, work from home. So that, silver lining that, people have gotten a little bit better about that.
Yeah, there was a few silver linings out of it, but you're right. The fear that was predicated, and then, wearing the mask out of compliance is a different issue than wearing the mask because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
Because tried to make it a right thing to do.
Yeah, because it makes sense in this situation, right? But just, the amount of fear that people showed, I guess that was a little surprising. Maybe it shouldn't have been, just because of the reasons that we talked about, or like, people don't have a lot of resilience and they are afraid. And again, when you have a level of self-reliance, you're not as scared of as much stuff, and you're not as willing or as eager to be told what to do. I think that's what it revealed, is like, man, I didn't think people wanted to be told what to do as much as they did, but they really do. People don't want to have to take personal responsibility. Well, if the government says it, if they're wrong, then that's on them. And I don't have to, actually use my brain power and critical thinking to figure this out for myself. I just do what they tell me to. And, then I don't have to worry about it. And I think that's what we really ran into, which is unfortunate. I want to say I was surprised by the audacity of certain people who were supposed to be in charge and were supposed to be looking out for everyone, and how they went about delivering information of like, wait a minute, you said this yesterday and now today you said this, but you're going to pretend like you didn't say that, and you're just going to move past, like, you know what I mean? Like,
but how quickly people forget that as well, which was crazy.
Yeah, but again, it's not surprising when you take into account all the things that we've talked about of how we've gotten to where we are as a society, and why we've gotten there, the reasons that we explained. And it's like, we're not equipping people. And you don't have to put on a tinfoil hat to understand, that it's like, well, if you are the person who's kind of calling the shots, it's a hell of a lot easier to achieve your goals when you have people who are compliant. Well, guess who's not super compliant? The people who are self-reliant, the people who don't need you, the people who can think for themselves and do think for themselves. They're going to say, whoa, wait a minute. They're not just going to blindly do the thing that you want them to do. And so if you're a person who wants people to do what you want them to do, then why wouldn't you stack the cards in your favor? Why wouldn't you, shift the tide in that direction to create people who become more self-reliant? Again, it all goes back to this idea of critical mass. It's self-serving, right? The decisions that are being made are not being made for the benefit of anyone other than the corporation, right? That is where it's coming from. And the people who are in charge of that are, again, they're only serving themselves. If you think that there's anyone, I say anyone, that's maybe not fair. There has to be someone. I have to believe that there is someone out of the 530, 40 something people that we have up there, in total, there's got to be someone who does care about someone other than themselves. But the vast majority, when it comes down to it, if it's you or them, they're going to go with them.
They're going to go with them. Yeah. And so speaking of that, and they've proven it over and over again, and only those that are blindly compliant are refusing to see this at that point, or at this point. So looking forward,
yep.
And by the way, one of my mentors, Andy Frisella, always says this: personal excellence is the ultimate rebellion.
Yeah.
It's like his tagline now at this point, as he's talked about this mess. And that's exactly what you're speaking to. So looking forward, maybe that's the answer, but maybe you have a different spin on it. Knowing we have a mess in front of us, what do we as men need to do differently to get ourselves, our families, our communities, and our country back on track?
Again, we have to be better, and we can almost look at this as a silver lining, as painful as it is, as bad as it is. We can say, oh, boo-hoo, our generation, we have to deal with this bullshit. It's finally coming to a head, and it's gotten so out of hand, and why us, and that sort of thing. But I look at it as like, man, what a beautiful opportunity to make changes and corrections and shift the course. Imagine if we had continued to just go down the same path, right? And we just stayed in this limbo of existing where no one really gave a shit. No one had to try hard at anything. It wasn't that bad, but it wasn't that good. Man, it's kind of,
who wants that?
No, who wants that, right? I mean, I think in some ways, and hopefully I don't live to regret this. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point. But in some ways, our hand has been forced where it's like, fuck. All right, I got to do the thing. I got to do some things now, which is actually what we need anyway, which, so it's, yes, it will improve the overall society, but it's going to improve us, right? Where it's like, man, I guess I better figure out how to raise some freaking chickens because, dude, I'm gonna have to take out a second mortgage just to get a few dozen eggs, right?
I learned that last year.
And so, but rewind 10 years ago, you would have never thought about it. You're like, what a pain in the ass. Why would I do that? Why would I go through the headache of building a chicken coop and raising these freaking animals that I have to take care of all the time? And when I can just go to the grocery store and get a dozen eggs for like $2, like that's asinine. Well, now it makes sense. And now it's the impetus to get us up, to get us, doing the things that, again, the organism actually craves. It craves to get dirty, to be in the sunshine, to feel the earth, to do all these things that is as much as we probably don't feel it, that we're connected to. And again, not to get too woo-woo hippie here, but it's like, again, we are an animal. We are part of nature. We are not separate from nature. I know most of us are removed from it. Again, we're insulated from it, but this earth was created for us. We are a part of it, and we are supposed to exist within the ecosystem, not not separate from, right? We're one and the same. And so it's kind of forcing us to become more integrated in that. And I think, in all of the ways that we can do, that we can improve, right? Both physically, mentally, spiritually, those are the things that we need to be working on as men to make ourselves more capable, to become more resilient, to become more self-reliant. And it's not just an internal thing. And this is where I think this is an idea that I've been kind of kicking around a little bit. I think you've got two belief systems, both have some merit, but both have their shortcomings. And so on the like self-help, uber ultra spiritual, new age, plant medicine side of thinking, right? You have people that are working really, really hard to improve themselves and find themselves and understand who they are, right? Which is great, really important. But there's no follow through to that. It just stays internal. It's never expressed externally, right? And then on the other hand, I think from a traditional religious standpoint, especially from the Christian religion, it's constantly, we've got to help each other. We've got to help. We've got to give. We've got to bring this person to salvation. We have to do for them, and we have to, it's all charity and all external, right? Well, you can't help anyone if you can't help yourself,
100.
right? And if you only help yourself, you're worthless. So we have to bridge those two kind of ideologies where it's like, yeah, and I'm not saying everyone has to go out and do ayahuasca, but you need to do some work internally on yourself, right? You need to improve yourself. And then you also need to take those and teach them to your kids. Be that model, that role model that they need to look up to. Help your neighbor and that person who could use a hand. Go show your hipster buddy how to change a tire or whatever, right? We need to be doing both. And I think for men, it starts within, but it has to have the intention of going beyond that. And ideally, while you're learning and growing, you can be teaching as well. The best way to learn something is to teach it, right?
And you would know that as a former teacher, right? Well, you're still teaching, but
yeah, but I mean, even in coaching wrestling, right? When I left college wrestling and I started coaching, my wrestling ability, I went back and would like train with guys, and I was like, holy shit, I've gotten really good. How did that happen? And it's because by synthesizing it internally and then projecting it externally, it assimilates into you so much, deeper. And so you understand it. And so I see the same thing with jujitsu, right? To really learn a technique, to know a technique, I have to show that, right? And so the more I can teach, the more I can learn, right? Yes. And then the more I can learn, the more I'm able to teach. And so round and round it goes. It's self-perpetuating if we have the intention and we actually go through the effort.
Well, here's how I would say, for those that are trying to, as we sum up here, get better and go into that, whether it's a self-help thing, just grow to the next level, personally, professionally, spiritually, financially, whatever it might be. I'll just give the example of 75 Hard last year. When I did 75 Hard for the first time, I was doing it for me to get mentally better, but I shared my journey along the way. And over that time, I inspired 47 others last year to do it.
No kidding.
Right. They're just, and some finished it, some didn't, but either way they were doing it for themselves. So this year I started a group, and what I found out, I said, hey, I just threw out one social media post and said, hey, doing 75 Hard again this year, who's coming with me? And I got, there's 42 people in that group right now. And we'll continue to add throughout the year as we continue to share our journey and our wins and the struggles that we faced along with it. But what I found, not just in 75 Hard, but also in many life things, like if you're elevating yourself in personal development, in your professional career, in your spiritual being, there's three camps of people that are in your circle. There's one that's complacent, doesn't care what you're doing, why you're doing it, whatever. They're just there. They're existing. Mm-hmm. There's another camp of crabs that are hating on you, trying to pull you back down because what you're doing and elevating yourself is shining a light on their insecurities and why they're not doing that. And then there's a third camp that are going to be inspired by what you're doing and want to join that as well. And that's where Andy Frisella talks about that personal excellence is the ultimate rebellion, because you're actually it's like the rising tide raises all ships, right? So you're bringing others along with you, and that's what you're speaking to on the teaching side of things as well. So pay attention to those three camps. Don't be, the complacent ones aren't going to bother you, right? The ones that are being haters or crabs may bother you because they were your friends at one point, and you're elevating past that where they're comfortable of themselves or you being. That's that might borrow. Go ahead.
I just want to interject. Those were never your friends, by the way.
Yes.
You might have thought they were your friends. They're for sure not.
Or they were just meant to be in your life for a season, not the rest of your life. Yeah. And that's an important epiphany for many to have as well. Even family members, right? So my wife and I have had some family members that have done some really shitty things in the past few years. And sometimes you just got to distance yourself from family because they just aren't who you thought they were, or they've changed, or you've changed, or whatever it may be. But some people are only meant to be there for a season. So just keep those three camps in mind, because as you elevate, you're going to inspire others, and those will be your people, not the ones you're leaving behind. Yeah.
I mean, as you were saying that, I was trying to think of the other two camps, and I was like, I don't even know those people, like, because that's so far removed. Like that it doesn't even exist to me. Like there could be crabs, I wouldn't know about it. You know what I mean? Like not that I'm.
Well, when you're first breaking out, when you're first making that transition, that's when you'll feel those crabs. Once you get up there, you're going to be in like the position you're in, Josh. And like, I don't even notice them anymore.
Maybe it's just because I'm oblivious, right? And I just to focus on other stuff or whatever. But yeah, I think we forget. And again, this is a profoundly human characteristic, and it's one of the most powerful things that we are endowed with, is the ability to change our environment, right? More so than any other creature on this planet, we can change our environment, right? Or we can remove ourselves from our environment. We have the ability to move, right? And we can move and we can change the world around us in such a way that you can create almost whatever life you want for yourself. And I think people forget that ability, and so they feel, or they limit that ability, and they're like, okay, but unless I had like a $10 million, I could never make this change. And it's like, that's not true. If I gave you $10 million today, you wouldn't do anything different. Why? Because you don't have the vision or the understanding. It's not about the resources that you have. It's your ability to change your perspective about a problem, right? That's all you're doing, is shifting your perspective. You're seeing that problem from a different angle. The only way you can gain that is through experience, right? Through experience and insight, which means you have to do things. You can't gain experience and insight from just watching videos or reading a book or listening to guys like us, run our yaps on a podcast. You have to go do some stuff, and you have to be willing to fail and screw it up,
Yep. So speaking of that, I was just sorry to cut you off there. Speaking of that, I want to really key on that. As we wrap up here, how do we best help young men out there? Or if a young man is listening to this and they're like, I'm down with this savage gentleman type concept. How do we, and let's say they have some misguided priorities because of their own selfishness or their way they were raised, or they're a product of their environment, but they resonate with your message today, or they resonate with our conversation. What guidance do you give them going forward?
Keep going, keep looking. You can't hide truth. Truth is ineffable, right? And it will always be truth. And if you are seeking to find your truest self and where you truly belong on this earth and what you're supposed to do, keep going, keep gaining the experience, keep seeking, and continue to learn. Is kind of the raw. I mean, I don't know if that's really an answer. I didn't really give a lot of direction. I think, maybe you were looking for something like, oh, you got to do this, this, and this, but I can't write that playbook for you. Unfortunately, I wish I could. I don't have any answers for anyone. I really don't. And this is something that I think is hard if you base a business model off of giving people answers, right? Because you have to understand they're can't
different
give
for
anyone.
everyone.
Well, there are no answers. There are only better questions, right? There's
Yeah.
no an answer to anything. You just learn to ask better questions, and the asking of better questions will help you to arrive, at a different place, and hopefully that place is where you want to be. And if you can realize that where you are is already where you want to be, then you've found it. And then everything you do from then on simply becomes an extension of that. And now this place where you are, you can bring other people into that place of being where they want to be and where they need to be. But we can't do that. Again, no one can give you the answer to that. You have to find that through yourself, through seeking truth and being, and truth requires honesty, raw, real honesty that most people aren't willing to tap into, because it can be painful. It can hurt a lot. And again, this is where that resilience. So maybe you have to practice resilience elsewhere, right? Maybe before you can take a long, hard look and swallow that difficult pill, maybe you got to do something else difficult, right? Maybe you got to do a 75 hard type thing. Maybe you create some other kind of arbitrary challenge for yourself, something physically, mentally, spiritually challenging that you go through and see, to build up that strength and that resilience. And then you can start taking those hard looks. And I'm willing to bet that along the way, during that process, as you're doing the hard thing, whatever that is, it's going to start to reveal some things. And because you've got some experience to dwell on, you're going to be able to accept those and move forward. Personally, I'm more of a 75 medium kind of guy. I feel I've done enough hard shit. I like medium. And what I find is when I'm doing medium stuff, it will just like, when it's appropriate, it'll naturally turn hard. I'm like, you know what? Just for no reason, like, yes. Now, and I'll do something that I never thought I was physically capable of doing. It'll be harder than anything that I could have dreamed of. This isn't to like knock on what Andrew Frisell is doing with that, because it's an amazing thing to see. I mean, you said you've got 80 something guys now total that you've gotten on board with this.
Guys and gals.
What he's done with that program is absolutely amazing. But for me, like I said, I like medium. But
then you eventually get to hard. So I think the point is for people
I'll
to
for
actually
sure do hard stuff, even if I like. I just know myself well enough that I don't have to set out to do 70 hard. I have to do something. 75 easy's not going to get me there. But if I can commit to like medium, the hard will come when it needs to.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. I know a lot of people are going to get a lot from this message. Where can they find you, follow you, if they want to sign up for one of your Savage Gentlemen? I mean, obviously the apparel, but if they want to get to know some of your programs, where would be the best spot? Yeah, so we've got our website, and we've got our t-shirts and apparel. We also have a bespoke clothing line where we've got some really nice jackets and vests and shirts and things. And that's savagegentleman.com is our main website. You can access our podcast from there and dive into kind of our blog is there as well. So some of the ideas that we discuss here kind of goes into a little bit more depth there. On social media, you can find me personally at Josh Tyler MMA on Instagram and Facebook. We have a Savage Gentleman Facebook page. And Instagram is at Savage Gentleman Official. And then where we kind of dive in, because again, this is all just kind of observation level, right? The participation level right now, what we have is what we're calling the League of Savage Gentlemen. And it's a closed Facebook group where we actually have discussion about some of these ideas and topics, and guys can ask real questions and give advice, for the ones who maybe didn't have that person to answer when they were growing up, right? If you were a guy
that never went hunting as a kid, and now you're like me and you're 30 something years old and you're trying to get into, almost 40, trying to get into it, and you're like, oh, man, what, I just take a gun out in the woods and hope for the best. Like if you missed certain lessons, right, you can come there and you can ask those questions with no penalty. No one's going to be like, oh, I can't believe you don't know how to do fill in the blank. Every man should know. And it's like, we've weeded out. No one gives a shit about your tough guy bravado. We're there to learn. We're there to teach. We're there to help each other, to support. And that's the League of Savage Gentlemen. It's a closed Facebook group you have to be accepted into. And I'm in the process now of creating a higher tier of that called the Legion of Savage Gentlemen. It's still in the works. It's something that, I don't know when this comes out that it will have it finalized, but we're making, this is something that I've been really wanting to do for a while now. And I think I've finally assembled a team that can help me pull it off to the level that I think it deserves. And so that's something that I'm excited about, that people can keep an eye out for. And if they have any questions, if they want to reach out to me directly about anything Savage Gentleman related or anything we discussed here, shoot me an email, shoot me a DM on social media. I'm happy to help any way I can. Again, what's the point in learning things and improving yourself if you can't actually use that anywhere else? If you can't, help anyone else out with that knowledge, it's kind of pointless.
Yeah, absolutely. Givers give. I love it. All right, Spartans, remember, as I always say, good and great are the enemies of possible. Lead like a Spartan today.